But let's take a few moments now to be still and get ourselves centered in that great idea that is suggested by the first commandment. The Lord God is one. Out of the diversity of human experience and the seeming thought of duality that intrudes upon us so often, it is important to return to the consciousness of the one. To know that God is one, and each of us is one in the one and one with the one, and that we're created in the image likeness of the one. So that this oneness is the heart and root of our being. It's the key to our effectiveness. It's the source of our power. So we acknowledge that there is only one presence and one power, one infinite mind, one source of love, one creative process, one flow of the constancy of divine action. And we're in it. It is in us. And this is all there is. And may we realize this truth in deeper and more expansive ways this evening. That we may go on our way as we leave here with a new perspective, a new outlook, a new faith, new courage, and a new spontaneity of life, all because we have a greater realization of our own roots in the oneness of God. And so be it. Well, let's take a look at the Ten Commandments. That's our purpose for being here. And in a way, our goal is to upgrade the commandments. Whenever I make that statement, someone usually says, well, how can you upgrade a law? Either it's a law or it isn't a law. If it's a law, you can't change it. Well, we're not trying to change the law. But the commandments are almost arbitrary statements of fundamentals that are expressed in a very naive way, as we've said before, like building fences for children and instructing children, you can't do this and you can't do that. But they're intended to deal with fundamental laws, and ultimately the individual must commit himself to keeping the law, not keeping the commandment. Because the commandment, by and large, tends to be in its appearance restrictive, and the law is supportive. And it's an entirely different thing, and we must move from one to the other. We must get into the consciousness of the fundamental spiritual law involved and begin to work with it. So the commandments need to be upgraded, or as I've said it somewhat facetiously, but very sincerely, that we have placed the emphasis for so long upon keeping the commandments, and now the need is to learn how to break them down, to get them out of their packages, their boxes, and to really understand the relationship of the fundamental spiritual law. And as we've said, there has been a great emphasis upon the need for new morality and ethics, and the suggestion that if everybody learned the Ten Commandments and abided by them, that we wouldn't have any problems in the world. And that sounds good. But as far as I'm concerned, the goal is not simply to improve conduct or to change character, important as those things are. The real need in the long run is to modify consciousness, because life is consciousness. And one can do certain things in conduct and have certain character traits that he adheres to very carefully, and yet behind it all, he may have a tremendous frustration because of the confusion in his consciousness. One can learn to abide by the commandments or any kind of religious observance and keep the spirit of them, or at least keep them in the letter, I should say. But actually, back of it all, there can very easily be a person who either doesn't understand them or who resists the implications of them. And so he's moving in two directions at the same time. And his consciousness, ultimately, is the thing that is going to express itself in his life. Thus he may on the one hand live a very morally upright life and be ethical in all his behavior because that's what he learned in church, and yet he may find that he can't understand the reason that he has so many problems, so many physical pains and heartaches and confusions and difficulties in his finances and so forth, simply because his consciousness is moving in the wrong direction. And so this is what we're dealing with. And we feel that the commandments very definitely deal with this matter of consciousness. Well, we're going to move into the fifth commandment tonight. And this is one that would seem to need very little explanation, but it needs an awful lot. And it goes like this, as most of you remember: honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God gives you. Now, as I've pointed out, the commandments are listed in several places in the Bible. We read the one from Exodus. There's another one in the 5th chapter of Deuteronomy. This one adds a little bit to the original, or to the one in Exodus. For it says, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long, and that it may go well with thee in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, which seems to add the idea of prosperity or abundance or well-being to the other idea of long life. And I think that's kind of significant. But obviously it would appear that this is an important law, because it suggests that in keeping this law, you will experience this abundant process of long life and prosperity. Now, the emphasis has normally been upon the obvious. Respect your parents. In other words, someone would say, well, what else does it say? Honor your father and your mother. You have to respect these people. Be good to your old man, and so forth. And this has been the sort of moralistic way in which we've dealt with the commandment. Now, I think you'll discover, and I hope you will at least accept the challenge of our consideration, that there's so much more involved, because this has touched but superficially with the underlying spiritual law. And it has led to an awful lot of downright hypocrisy. In the first place, honor and respect. To respect someone, to honor someone, is, in its usual usage, a very anemic way of dealing with the process. In other words, it's very much like tolerance. I've mentioned many times before that I think tolerance is a very weak word. It's a word that used to be emphasized as one of the great Christian graces, to be tolerant. And usually what it implied was, and very strongly, that you hate these people, you don't want to live with them, you don't want to associate with them, you don't want any part of them, but you must learn to be tolerant. In other words, to paste it all over with an air of graciousness behind which there's prejudice and resentment and hatred and so forth. And often this is what has happened in the idea of honor thy mother and thy father. I must be good to my mother and my father because the Bible says so, because that's the ethical thing to do. I hate them, I can't stand them, I'm bitter and upset because of what they've done to my life, but I honor my mother and my father, you see. Now obviously this is being very crude and somewhat facetious, but let's take a look at that. First of all, if this commandment refers only to this, simply the respect to your parents, then it's strange that it should ever be included in this series of fundamentals. Because, you see, among the Israelites of that day, and carrying down to today as one of the hallmarks of the Jewish tradition, family solidarity was certainly one of the strongest characteristics. So that there was a sense of the relationship and the respect of parents and the close family life that was simply part of the social texture of these people and still is. So that to deal with it in a special commandment is about as redundant as to have a couple of other commandments that said you must breathe and you must eat. Because it's on that same self-evident level that the Jewish culture has always related to the family process. So that there must be something more involved or it wouldn't have been included in these commandments. That's my thesis. So looking much more deeply, I've discovered some things. And this is nothing I've manufactured, but the word that is translated honor in our modern scriptures is the Hebrew word kabad, which literally means heavy, burden, burdensome, and a lot of other synonyms closely related. How do you make that make any sense? In other words, honor your father and your mother literally says burden your father and your mother, or that they are your burden that you are accepting gladly, or something or other, you see. And obviously this is somewhat of the idea that's involved. But there's so much more than that, because, you see, a great deal of frustration and bitterness and guilt in the offspring is evoked as a result of a sense of responsibility, a sense of accepting burdens, and a sense of doing certain things which one does not really do gladly, but he does because he's commanded to do so. In other words, and on the other hand, you'll find that there are many, many parents who have used this sort of as a club with the idea, after all, I'm your parent, therefore you owe me respect, and you must do this and that and the other and so forth. So out of it has come an awful lot of confusion. Now, the important thing, and this goes right back again to the first commandment, and these are all interlaced, you see. We have to see one against the backdrop of the other. And the first commandment, as we said, is the fundamental out of which all the whole structure is built. The Lord God is one. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. This oneness. Therefore, who is your true parent? God. God is your parent. And the burden implied in this word kabed actually is the burden of our own pregnancy with the divine process. You know, we often say of a woman who's heavy with child that she's carrying her burden. You see, she has this tremendous burdensome process going on. It's not a thing that she regrets or resents, but we simply accept it as the process, a birthing process that according to most experiences requires pain and requires the acceptance of a great deal of responsibilities. The point is, each one of us is heavy with child, the Christ child, the God self within us. Within every one of us is the unborn possibility of limitless life. And ours is the privilege and the responsibility of giving birth to it. So to truly honor our father and our mother is to accept the responsibility to let God be God in us and let the divine process express through us. Now that may seem to be taking this out of context, but let's look at it a little bit. In the first place, as we've said, God is your true parent. And therefore, your parents did not create you, no matter that sometimes Mama may like to impress you with this so that you will be devoted to her. She didn't create you. Your parents didn't create you. They are the channels through which this divine process is worked. And in terms of the eternal aspect of man, I like to believe that you existed long before your mother or father had anything to do with you, and you'll exist a long time after they're through with you. And therefore, you are an eternal being, but there was a means through which you could find access and entrance into this experience, and therefore through the cooperation of mother and father, who were thus stewards, who were midwives, as it were, in the divine process of unfoldment. They played a very specific role, and certainly a specific role that is important and for which there should be a great deal of gratitude. But your true parent, you see, is the creative process, that one in which you live and move and have your being, which created you and nurtured you. And so the commandment is really saying, honor God, acknowledge Him in all your ways, bless your mother and father as channels through which this came forth, but accept the responsibility yourself of keeping in the flow of the divine process. And you can't do that as long as you're all hung up in bitterness or possessiveness or enslavement of devotion to your earthly parents, you see, so that you can keep in the flow of the divine process, and thus, as the commandment says, that you will live long and it will go well with you. Now, remember Khalil Gibran commenting on parents and children. He says, and I think very articulately, your children are not your children. They are sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And he goes on and says a lot more, which we won't go into now. But when we miss this ideal, we create an awful lot of confusion. And if, as is normally done, if we feel that this commandment is saying that it is absolutely imperative that children respect and honor their parents, and we teach the child to respect his parents at all costs, no matter what, always respect your parents, then we create some problems. Because the most important thing for any person, long before he fulfills any responsibilities or injunctions to respect anybody, respect government, somebody's been trying to get us to respect the presidency, to respect this or that or the other, or to respect parents, the most important thing is that we respect ourselves. And without self-respect, there cannot be any true, sincere respect for anything. And the problem that has come in the literal acceptance of this commandment is that we've been taught you must respect your parents come hell or high water. No matter what, you respect them, you honor them. And often in doing that, possibly because of hang-ups and confusions and a lack of understanding on our part, possibly because of complications of interaction, possibly and quite often because the parents themselves have hang-ups and problems which they take out on their children and so forth, to openly accept the idea that I must or that I do honor and respect my parents is not only to engage in hypocrisy, but also to get involved in a great deal of undergirding thought and feeling and emotion that is extremely confusing, and in the end, to totally lose our own self-respect. An awful lot of people who have accepted the literal aspect of this commandment have lived out their lives with no self-respect at all because they are working so hard to respect their parents who actually they hate. Now that gets rather Freudian, but one has to be very honest with himself. Not the kind of things you tell people about, but the things you feel within yourself. In a sincere feeling about the relationship with mother and father, and what you really believe, what you really feel, not what you say you believe or what you think you should. And if you deal with it on this level, I think you'll recognize that there must be a lot more involved than simply the literal injunction to honor your parents. In other words, I'd like you to consider, first of all, an experience of my own. This is somewhat of a confession, but early along in my experience as a parent, I could never quite understand why a child should be expected to respect his parents just because he's their parents. I could never accept that, even when I had my own children. Why should he respect me just because I'm his parent? In other words, I should be respectable. If I want his love, I must be lovable. If I want his friendship, I must be friendly. Well, this was a naive attitude that I had. And so I entertained this idea, and to the best of my ability, I'm sure I failed and faltered many times, but I went with the thesis that I didn't want my boys to respect me just because I happened to be their father. I had hoped and wanted and desired that they would want to associate me and that they would accept me as a friend simply because they liked me, not because I was their parent. This was an ideal, a very naive ideal that I had. I don't know whether this was my own or whether I'd grasped it from somewhere else, but at least it's the thing that I always worked on. And to achieve this, I realized that I had to really get involved in letting them go. I had to forget, not to relinquish my responsibility, which obviously is heavy with a parent, but to forget that these are my children, and thereby they owe me something for all that I'm doing to them. To let that go, you see, and to constantly be involved in in loving the Christ in them more than I loved the human of them. It is in that human feeling that I may feel a possessive pride of ownership. And it's out of that and the ego that is involved and so forth that many parents are crushed by what their children do, and the children run off and go their own way, or they drop out of college, they do all sorts of things. And this is terribly disturbing and upsetting to the parent, basically because the ego is wounded. Because the parent, you see, has the feeling this is my child, and even more than that, subtly, because we're all insecure people within ourselves, the parent feels that I never achieved all that I would like to achieve in my life, so I'm going to do it in my child. So I want my child to do this, I want him to do that, I want him to be this, I want him to be that, so that somehow I'll be able to bask in my lengthened shadow, which is being fulfilled in his life. All these are very subtle things, but they're very, very much involved in the relationships. If a child is not given this injunction, you must love and respect your parents, if that's eliminated entirely from the teaching process, and instead we place the emphasis upon the first commandment, the realization that He's one, that there's one God and He's one with the one, and there's only one life and one substance and one love within Him. He's in it, it's in Him, it's the reality of His experience. Out of this will come a healthy self-realization, a healthy awareness of self, a healthy self-acceptance and self-respect. And out of this will come the tendency to respect people, to look beyond their limitations, beyond their weaknesses, to salute the Christ in them. And out of this will come a healthy, normal respect for parents, but it'll be real because it will be unfolded from their own inner consciousness. And there will be not this tremendous block that I must do it. A little boy once said, and I think this is classic, he said when his daddy was waving his finger and saying, you must do this and you must do that because I'm your daddy, and the little boy looked up and he said, Daddy, don't say must to me because it makes me feel won't all over. This is one of the hang-ups that we have from early along in life, because each one of us is a spiritual being in the process of giving birth to our greater potentialities, and our parents, and I'm one of them, are forever wagging their finger. You do this because I say so. This is right for you. You must do that. You must do that. Creating an awful lot of resistance. And basically because the parent has fear. The parent does not have faith in the realization that the true parent is the divine activity that's flowing through him, and that the parent is simply the steward. The point is, we take a look at Jesus, and we find some rather startling things. Some of you may be Bible scholars, and you may know some of the things we're going to talk about. But Jesus would appear to be, if we do not see his life and teachings in the fullest context, he would appear to be one who must have had an awful relationship with his parents, or somehow he was down on parenthood or the family institution, because he made statements like this: call no man on earth your father except your Father within. And then he goes beyond that. He says, if any man cometh to me and hateth not his father, mother, wife, and children, he cannot be my disciple. Hateth not. He says, he that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And then there's another one where a man came to him and said he wanted to be a disciple. And Jesus told him they had to do this and that and the other. The man said, well, first I must go and bury my father. And Jesus said, let the dead bury the dead. And of course this would be shocking, but before we make a judgment that Jesus was just down on parenthood, we want to see it against the backdrop of the unsurpassed devotion and loyalty and compassion and love that he showed for his mother. So obviously there was something else involved, you see. So, the thing that Jesus was trying to do, and mind you, Jesus dealt with the commandments. You can go through the Gospels and you can pick out practically, and I think every one of the commandments dealt with by Jesus at a different level. In almost every case he will say, in effect or subtly, that ye have heard it said of old, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, etc., etc. But I say unto you, then he upgrades it and gives a new insight from the standpoint of the fundamental law involved. What he's saying here in these statements is that we should not get so immersed in human burdens which cause us to get out of the flow of our own relationship with the divine process, which is all we have. Once we lose our contact, our relationship with the universe, with the universal flow, or our own oneness with God, then we're like the prodigal son. We're out in the far country. We get lost. We come to know what. We struggle. We try to hold on to relationships, and we try to demand, and we try to plead. Nothing works. Everything falls apart, and we have all sorts of breakdowns because we're out of the flow, and we destroy ourselves. What he's saying is, don't become so involved in possessiveness and in the sense of being possessed and thinking only in terms of human responsibility, that you forsake the responsibility of maintaining your own relationship with the One, the Father within. Truly honor your parents by freeing them into their experience on their level of consciousness, and accept that freedom for yourself. If you do not, you dishonor them. Even if they may claim otherwise, you dishonor them if you do not free them, because you are accepting limitation, and that isn't really what parenthood is all about. In other words, love God more than people. This is what Jesus is saying, or, to put it more specifically, love the divinity or the Christ in a person more than you love the human in him. When we love the divinity in a person, the divine level of the person, or the Christ in the person, then he will not be hampered by possessiveness, by smother love, by guilt feelings because he has done or not done something that he feels is contrary to what he's been taught, or that he will be hurt because of some feeling of rejection. Just stop and think, those of you who have parents now, or those of you who have the memory of a confused relationship with parents, just think of all the hours that one spends worrying about his parents, trying to find the right sense, the right relationship, the right responsibility. What should I do? What's the right thing to do? How can I best even fulfill my spiritual ideals in this? When the true need is to bless them and to loose them, to know that God is within them and God is their Father even as God is my Father, and their parent is the divine process even as my parent is the divine process. Honor them by honoring God in them and in me and as the overall divine process that's everywhere present. Now this is something that's very much involved, and there's a great deal more involved, obviously, in this matter of the relationship with parent. We may be able to get into it more in our discussion period, but we want to go on a little bit from this, because there's another more specific meaning of the commandment, which is certainly no less important, perhaps is more important, because as we say, the commandments are dealing with guidelines for an integrated life. That means the means of getting ourselves integrated in the divine process. And we get all hung up and away from the thing and get into psychology and everything else if we just deal with strictly relationship with mother and father. In other words, there's a personal responsibility involved in what we become in our lives. I heard a talk that goes way back. I think maybe I was in junior high school, which was a few years ago. It's rather interesting that I remember this particular talk, because it was announced that this man, this very well-respected man, was going to speak to the student body on the subject, "Be good to your old man." And we all kind of assumed that here was going to be some fellow in his hail fellow, well-met personality and his business-like approach was going to go over the same old hat Sunday school morality about how important it was to be good to your mother and father. This is what we expected, and we had to go. It was one of those assemblies that everybody is herded into. And we were dumbfounded, and I'll never forget that because of the impression it made upon me, that the man said not one single thing at all about mother and father, or the importance of being good to them. Yet his title was "Be Good to Your Old Man." Because what he was saying, right where you are now, you should be very careful and cautious and use a great deal of good judgment, because what you do today and what you think today and what you identify with today is going to have a tremendous influence upon the person that you will be in later years. And that's your old man. Your old man. The old man or the old woman of your life, you see. In other words, it's following the idea that the child is the parent of the adult. And it was a very important and a very helpful lesson, especially against the backdrop of what we expected that it might be. Your old man is the one who will evolve out of the person you now are. And in your thoughts and your actions and your motivations and your relationships today, you're shaping the person that you will become. So be very careful. Be good to your old man by taking care of what you do today. You see, now that's the fundamental process of truth, really, if you stop and think about it. Keep your thoughts wholly upon God. Keep yourself in the flow. Don't lose the consciousness of the flow, or else you will get out of this perspective and this unfolding process. That's why the commandment says very clearly at the beginning that, and let's read it exactly, that your days may be long and that it may go well with thee in the land which the Lord your God gives you, you see. That you must keep in the flow so that you will have this continuity of the divine process. And many of us get out of that flow early along in life or along the way in life where we lose our perspective, we lose our focus, we lose this consciousness of the oneness, we get all hung up in relationships with people, and so many of the challenges and difficulties in life, as certainly our psychiatrists and psychologists harp upon, have a great deal to do with the relationship with parents. Unfortunately, normally they leave it there, and that's too bad, because then we are totally misinformed. Because then we come to assume that my mother and my father are the cause of all the problems I have in my life, and therefore, I have to pick up the pieces and make the best of it. But that's unfortunate, because that isn't true. The thing is, we must make the transition from thinking of our mother and father as being the cause of our problems to looking to the one as our true parent. And we are still sons and daughters of the divine process. This is our relationship, and we want to get back into the flow again. Forget about all the feelings and attitudes and hang-ups that you have about your parents. Get back into the flow. Get the realization that what you do today, how you begin today, how you function today, what you identify with today and tomorrow will have everything to do with how your life unfolds from here. And no feeling that your mother and father ruined your life is going to change that, or is going to justify the results, because you are your own responsibility, you see. And you can start today to get back into the flow, again, of your relationship with God and go forth from here, you see. And this is a very important thing. In other words, it could well be said that you are constantly dishonoring God when you are limiting yourself in any way. Even if you make such a statement as we so often do, well, at my age, I guess I do pretty well. In a sense, this is dishonoring the divine process, because it's limiting. It's saying that, yes, God is my father, but I'm going to pot, I'm growing old, I'm getting more senile, I'm losing my faculties and so forth day by day, which is dishonoring God, which is losing the awareness of the divine process, if you can say it, your father, mother, God. Now look how beyond this we tend, as I would put it, to set traps for ourselves. And this is a whole subject in itself, and we'll just touch on it briefly. The Quakers have a saying that one should never take a vow because he mortgages his future. And this is one of the things that people, for instance, in the AA groups deal with. It's so easy to say, I'll never take a drink again. This is a good vow. I'll never take a drink again, ever. Well, never is a pretty long time. A pretty long time. And it doesn't account for a lot of other things that are going on in consciousness, you see, and how easily the vow is broken. And every time the vow is made and easily broken, there's a loss of self-respect. And there's a feeling, well, just goes to show you I'm no good. And every time we keep making more vows and breaking them, and then we feel less and less secure in ourselves as a person. Jesus said, thou shalt not forswear thyself, period. Don't take or make vows of any kind. Now, this is hard, and it causes some rethinking, I'm sure, on the part of a lot of people, because of the point that we do one of two things. Either we keep the vow that we've made, sometimes impetuously, and hold on to it stoically and feel trapped by a regrettable decision which blocks the flow of our own unfoldment, or else we break them with a sense of weakness of character and a feeling of the vindication of our long-held belief that we're no good anyway. For instance, you may say, as a truth student, and this is one of the things that so many folks involve themselves in the study of truth, I know that it's important that I behold the good in people and that I overcome criticism. So, I hereby make this vow, I will never be critical of anyone again. And again, that word never is a pretty long time. And how many of you that have ever made that kind of a vow? I'll never think a negative thought again. I'll never dwell upon my illnesses again. I'll never hate anybody again. How many of you have fulfilled it to the letter year by year? Some hands are going up. We have some hypocrites in the crowd. The point is, these vows are easily made and so easily broken, and whenever we break that kind of a vow, you see, then what we really do is simply vindicate our already negative feelings about ourselves, that we're really not worthy. So instead of saying, I will never be critical of anyone again, how much better it is to dwell on the importance of right thinking and get the idea that you are now free from criticism. Now, right now at this moment, and also now in the eternal now, that the I am of you is free from criticism. There's no criticism in you, in your greater self. I am now free from criticism. Not I will never criticize again, but I am now free from criticism. Dwell on that aspect of it, and then you will be free from the pressures of resolutions and the boxed-in feelings of having to bite your tongue and keep from saying certain things. Then you will be able to unfold as a person naturally and grow properly. This goes into other areas, such as marriage vows. And some people say, well, you mean you should take away all marriage vows? Well, as a matter of fact, there is a statement in the marriage vow that most people take, till death do us part. Till death do us part. Very few people really carefully analyze this. They impetuously gloss it all. After all, we love each other. What else counts, you see? Can a person really predict his future consciousness without mortgaging his future experience? We can't really, because life is growth, not static. And people who live within the boxed-in feeling, you see, that after all we've accepted this vow, we must live together till death do us part, even if we destroy ourselves in the process, which quite often is the case, you see, that's a person who actually is accepting all sorts of limitations simply because he's mortgaged his life. Now, that doesn't mean that marriage isn't right and that people shouldn't make a commitment. But the most realistic approach to this is that people need to regularly, occasionally, or at least annually, renew their vow or renew their commitment so that always they can say, I am doing this because I want to do it, not because I must. Because we create this barrier of pressure, and I think there are a lot of problems in marriages that come about because people are pressured into feeling that I can't get out of it, so therefore I want to get out of it. For a little other reason than that, the sense of pressure that is involved. For instance, many churches require vows of people to keep certain tenets and certain observances and certain holy days and to keep the commandments and so forth. And people are required to swear that they will do this all their lives. A person is supposed to unfold and growth means change. No one can hold the same views all his life. And if he accepts the boxed-in relationship of traditional religion with all of its crystallized creeds and tenets and vows to keep them all his life, he'll destroy himself in the process. Or he will give up. He will simply abdicate the sense of self-realization and self-discovery, or else he will be just a plain hypocrite, where many people find themselves. And I'm not saying a person should give up his church or give up the creeds or give up the religions and so forth. But I'm saying that what we do, we must always reevaluate. And for any student of truth today, he must take another look at what he does and what he's vowed to do and what he's committed himself to. Take another look at it. Do I really want to do this thing? If I don't, why don't I? Let me look at it. Let me admit that I don't and face up to it and begin to resolve some of these problems. And if I really want to do it, then I'm free from the pressure of feeling that I must do it. You see? And unless we look at those things, we're going to have all these dangling pressures, which again, the Quakers say is a matter of mortgaging our future. Be good to your old man. In other words, honor God with the unfolding process of what you will become. And keep yourself free from these these limiting commitments and vows and bondages so that you can be free to unfold and grow. Now, there are many people who say, well, you're just suggesting that everybody should live a life of license. That isn't it at all. License comes in, you see, only when a person feels a terrible sense of a lack of self-respect. He's tired of the pressures of the bondage that has been imposed or self-imposed as a result of all the vows that he's been required to take, and so he breaks loose and goes pell-mell in every direction at once. A person who really sees himself and builds upon the realization that he is one in the one with the one presence and the one power, and builds on this consciousness, no longer needs fences or thou shalt nots or vows to keep him from doing certain things, because he does what he does because he wants to do it. But the interesting thing is, he wants to do that which otherwise people told him he should do. He wants to do it because it comes out of his own spiritual unfoldment. Now, this commandment also has other application which goes into an area that we could spend weeks considering, because it deals essentially with what could be called the divine polarity. Honor God with the recognition of the father-mother, male-female aspect of the divine. God is the one, but in the one there is a creative process, and creativity involves male and female, you see. In other words, we go back into the first chapter of Genesis, and it says, let us make man in our image. Well, who were they talking about? We were told there's only one. You see, let us make man in our image. And then it says, male and female created he them. Well, if they're created in his image and are created male and female, then he must be male and female. Now, this is an aspect that is not just a Butterworth concept. This goes into a great deal of religious study and metaphysical study, and it goes way back into ancient times. As a matter of fact, in the ancient Hebrew teaching, there was the idea of El Shaddai, which was the divine feminine, the breasted one, you see. And this is one of the parts of the aspects of the nature of God. So that in man, you see, this creativity is seen as the coupling together of wisdom and love, or of the intellect and the emotions and the feelings. And ultimately, before one becomes truly established in his consciousness of the oneness of the one and his own divine expression of the one, he must achieve this balance. You see, when we first become involved in truth, our experience, first of all, is with the intellect. And this is refreshing to a lot of people, because many people have had their religious background in an experience that involved purely the emotions. You weren't supposed to think. You were just supposed to feel, you know. And the preacher would give a fiery sermon and so forth and get you all whipped up in your emotions and your feelings. Jesus is here, the Holy Spirit is here, and so forth. And it was a feeling type of process. So that quite often when we begin to study truth, we study fundamental laws, we study principles, we study ideas, we deal with statements, treatments, and so forth. And they're all intellectually spelled out. And there is a tendency to go all the other way and to get involved purely in the intellect and to lose this creative process of the intellect as well as the emotion and feeling. So it's not a matter of killing out the emotions, but we need that feeling aspect of our spiritual search as much as people in the emotional type of religion need more of an intellectual basis to tie it all together, you see. And the book of Revelations deals with this. We've discussed it recently in the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, dealing with the red horse of the emotion, the black horse of the intellect, the pale horse of the physical man, and the white horse of the Christ or the divine self. And the implication of this Revelation story is that ultimately we must bring all parts of our life, as Paul would say, into captivity under the Christ, which means under the divine self, that the white horse, the spiritual part of our nature must in a sense ride as the holder of the reins, and the horses, the black horse, the pale horse, and the red horse must pull together, you see. And it's a very important insight, and we're going to be dealing with that actually, in essence, in our workshop retreat the weekend after next. But the goal is to bring all things into balance, the balance of wisdom and love, the balance of intellect and feeling. This is true in prayer and treatment. We need a balance in our consciousness. So often a person is involved in a treatment thing, and he takes an affirmation, he speaks a series of words and so forth. But there must come a time when we experience our Sabbath, as we said last week, where we let go and enter in and let the divine mothering influence of the process breathe life into our consciousness, so that the words that we are so feverishly affirming and treating for may come alive and be a part of the whole process, you see. And so this then is the key to wholeness. And the promise of this commandment is that our days will be long and it will go well for us. In other words, we keep this commandment, this idea of accepting the responsibility of knowing that God is our true parent, that we must keep in the flow of that divine process of our own parenthood, that we will keep the responsibility to our old man, that we will accept that in terms of carefully watching our thoughts and our feelings and our attitudes from day to day, because what we think today and what we involve in today is going to have a great deal to do with what we ultimately become. And also that we will get this realization of the polarity involved in the process of the one, the masculine feminine, the feeling as well as the intellect and the mind, and that we couple them together and get this sense of relationship, so that the one becomes not simply an abstraction, but it becomes a creative flow within us. That is the coupling together of the creative process of divine thought and divine love into an experience of wholeness and fulfillment in us. And to the degree that we work with this and work on it, then the promise is our days will be long, which means we will have health, long life, and it will go well with thee, which means that we will experience abundance and prosperity and harmony in all of our relationships. It's a marvelous promise, isn't it? But as you can see, out of this simple commandment, which seems so self-evident and so obvious, it opens out into ideas that could require a lifetime to deal with. But this is another indication of the tremendous wealth of possibilities for growth and unfoldment are in these Ten Commandments. And we're going on next week. Next week we're going to study one that seems even the more self-evident. It's thou shalt not kill. How can you talk about that? Well, you can. And you'll see that it has many, many ramifications in our experience, and is all a part of this process of seeking the integrated life. All right, so much for our time tonight, which has flown by, unfortunately. And let's take a moment to bless and consecrate our gifts of love. And we'd like to suggest that you take your gift, whatever it is, and take it into your hand. See it, first of all, as the fulfilling of your human urge to participate, to put your hand as well as your heart in what you're doing. Then lift it up beyond that, to realize that there's something transcendent to the human urge or the feeling of responsibility that's at work in you. There's a divine flow, so that your giving essentially is giving way. It's saying yes, because the activity of God, the flow of Spirit, is a giving process, and it knows nothing else but giving. There's no withholding in the divine process. There's only frustration of it in our consciousness. So we take this gift in our hand and we see it as a symbol of opening the flow, of giving way to the divine process. And that divine flow, because it is a conscious awareness, flows forth into, touches, and transforms this gift itself, and it is swept forward on its way to do a tremendous work beyond its intrinsic value. But in the process of our giving way and of our loosing and letting go of something tangible, we then begin to experience this prospering fulfillment in our lives. So we declare together, divine love flowing through me blesses and increases all that I give and all that I receive. Do we know that together? Divine love flowing through me blesses and increases all that I give and all that I receive. All right, now let's just take a moment as we close to get still again. And as we have said repeatedly during this series, that the commandments deal fundamentally with spiritual laws that Moses, in his instruction process as a teacher, commended to the Israelites and thus to us. but to which we must make a commitment. And now's the time to make that commitment. The commitment to be in the process, that's it. Not a commitment to box ourselves in or to limit ourselves or to accept any literalisms or verbalisms, but the commitment to keep in the flow and to respect and honor the divine process in us. Respect it to the extent that we will allow nothing to interfere, nothing to keep us from that flow. No relationship, no outer sense of responsibility. Knowing that if we make the commitment to keep that sense of the inner flow, that will well up within us an understanding and a love and a compassion and a forgiveness and a respect and an honoring that will be just exactly right for our earthly parents and our loved ones and our friends and all our associates. And it won't be because we must do it. It will be something that will come right out of our own natural, spontaneous desire. And we give thanks for this consciousness and for the flow of harmonious experiences, long life, and that all things may go well with each of us. And so be it. God bless you.